Hello, Fantasy Endgame community. I'm Pierre, and it's time to talk baseball. So let's talk about your fantasy baseball draft and who should be the number one pick. So there are several good candidates, especially based on last year. Let's look at who the top choices are. Now, let me start out with some honorable mentions, guys that are definitely first rounders, maybe top 5 consideration, but just not worth the number one pick. Can't really consider them there. Talking about Jose Ramirez, solid 5 category contributor, but not worth a top pick. Bo Bichette, up and coming player, got that power speed combo, great lineup, but not number one overall. And then also Ronald Acuna, who last year was the number one pick in a lot of places. Coming off that serious injury, you just can't take that risk. All right, so those guys aren't going to be on this list. Let's kick off the top 5 choices. Let's start with the most obvious one, and that's Fernando Tatis Jr. I mean, what else can you say about this guy? Last year, hit 282, 42 home runs, 97 RBIs, 25 steals, and 99 runs scored. Keep in mind, that was all in just 130 games played. Now, here's the problem. He only played 130 games. Injuries, always a concern. He had that shoulder subluxation, and so you know that that's something that he is rehabbing this offseason. He opted not to get surgery. He's a guy that's going to go ahead and try to just rest, rehab, and see if everything comes back. But here is the issue, is that over the last portion of the season, his steals did drop considerably, didn't even try to run that much, understandably so. But if that happens next year, that'll obviously take a hit on his fantasy value. So he's got it all. That's not the concern. It's just health, right? Is it going to hold up? That's got to be concerned for the number one overall pick. So let's see, is he riskier than some of these other guys we're going to talk about? Now, the player who's been taken number 2 more often in these early drafts is Trea Turner, a guy who, just like Tatis, has that 5 category contribution across the board at a high level. Higher batting average for sure. He hit 328 last year, and his time with the Dodgers was even better. He was hitting 338. He finished with 28 home runs, 77 RBIs, 32 stolen bases, and 107 runs scored. Like I said, went to the Dodgers after the trade deadline and was even better. He actually doubled his power output his time with LA, going to obviously a better lineup. Going from shortstop to second base, he's got eligibility at both positions, so that's just something else that helps because second base is a little thinner than shortstop offensively, so you can slot him there. Look, there's not really any holes in his game. There's nothing you can say to discourage someone from taking Trea Turner with the first overall pick. You know, a full year in LA, who knows, maybe we'll see an even better seasoned guy who's 28 years old in his prime, so definitely a strong candidate there. All right, the other guy that you might see taken first overall in some drafts is Juan Soto. I mean, talk about a high floor. He arguably has the highest floor out of any of the players that I'm going to talk about. He's a guy who has hit 313 last season, 29 home runs, 95 RBIs, 111 runs scored, and chipped in 9 steals. So those numbers aren't as gaudy as the ones I've already talked about, but that batting average, you know, it's not that he's going to be a guy who's going to lead the league in home runs. But batting average is harder to come by these days than homers, right? You can find a guy who can hit a few homers here and there off the waiver wire. You know, you can kind of supplement power at other positions. But that batting average, that's something that is really hard to just catch up in once you fall behind in roto leagues especially. Juan Soto has been in the top 10 percentile in expected batting average each of the past 3 years, every year other than his rookie season. So in other words, ever since he turned 21. Which is crazy to say. This guy is only 23 years old and he's just scratching the surface of his potential. And we could see a true breakout season where the power numbers go up, but at the very least, you know what you're getting with him. The problem is the speed, right? Talk about players who are going 20, 30 stolen bases. He's not going to do that. He might reach double digits, but that is it. So if you want the sure thing, a guy who doesn't have any real injury risk, caps off your potential as far as the speed, you know, the chance of him finishing as the number 1 fantasy player aren't as strong as these other candidates. So that's where you weigh the risk versus the safety. How about Vladimir Guerrero, who was last year's fantasy MVP in roto leagues? only 22 years old. He had a mammoth season. 48 home runs, 111 runs batted in, and he scored 123 times along with that high batting average of 311. The power, we know, seen a guy who can win the home run derby and launch that many home runs, he's got it in the genes. So Guerrero in a great lineup, definitely better in Toronto than Soto has in Washington. But we do know that with Guerrero, you have that upside that's already been shown. I have a feeling we're going to see his ADP climb. He might get taken first overall in a couple leagues, but really I think more people are going to keep him as kind of like a third or fourth option, just because we've only seen him really do it once. All right, and then the final option here, it's a pretty good one. The reigning American League MVP, Shohei Ohtani. There's absolutely no doubt he was the most valuable player in baseball last year because, well, not many players are among the best offensive players in the league and one of the better pitchers in the game. Here's the thing. In real life, it's a no-brainer. He's the top player right now. But in fantasy, it's different because, well, you probably know that in most leagues, you can't use him as both at once. Not that he pitches and hits on the same games anyways, but you probably have to draft him as a separate player. You either get Ohtani the pitcher or Ohtani the hitter. So let's look just at the hitter because as a pitcher, he was really good, but we're not talking about first round or especially number one consideration here. So just as a hitter, his numbers stack up with all the guys we've talked about. 46 home runs, 100 RBIs, 26 steals, and 103 runs scored. The only difference is 257 batting average. So his power numbers almost match Vlad, but the batting average wasn't close. And so even though you get the speed, you're offsetting it with the average. That's the issue. A lot of people forget, look, Ohtani was drafted late last year. He was a league winner because he was drafted in the middle rounds, kind of a risky pick because of his injuries. You know, also, a lot of people don't remember that in 2020, yeah, it's a short season, but in that season, he hit 190. Okay, so he's kind of an all or nothing guy. His power numbers, his expected stats and StatCast were off the charts, but he had among the worst whiff rates and he struck out a lot. So it was more all than nothing for him, but there is the risk that he hurts your batting average if that number goes down, if he misses some more pitches, if pitchers are a lot more conservative when they pitch to him. So that's the thing. There's risk here. So to me, he can't be the number one pick, but of course, he's got to be first rounder even just as a hitter. All right, so what's the final verdict? Who is number one? Who would I take at the number one pick if I had it in an early 2022 baseball draft? It's got to be Tatis. The risk is there with the injury, but on a per game basis, he was the most valuable player in roto leagues last year. You know, Tatis has everything you're looking for. He plays the infield rather than the outfield. That's a little bit more helpful in terms of filling out your roster on draft day. All right, guys, this is Fantasy Endgame, helping you with your fantasy baseball drafts, help you win in 2022 and beyond. All right, thanks for watching.